So Jeremy, I thank you for gracing us at the Foundation of Unity with an interview on unity and from your perspective as a critical social scientist and a person. And we'd just like to start off by asking you, what is unity to you? What kind of personal experience have you had with unity?
I think that the common theme to anything I'm going to say, to anything that you ask me about this, both personal, intellectual, political, and social, is the theme that, and you and I have talked about this before, is this theme, this idea that exists in Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, Hegel, German philosopher, and in Buddhist thought, which is the idea of unity as unity of or unity in opposites. And that, for me, is the way both that I have experienced unity in my personal life, and surely those personal experiences have also contributed to my thinking about it intellectually in that particular way. When I was thinking about this, in advance, several things, came to my mind. One of them was a very formative experience that I had as a child. And I think my perception of unity in difference or unity in opposites was affected by the fact, first of all, that my family moved a lot when I was a child, so I was exposed to different environments. And second of all, when I was 7 years old, my family moved from the United States to France, and I spent my childhood for the next 6 years in France. And we arrived in May of 1948 in France, and that was 2 months before Bastille Day, which is July 14th. So on July 14th, 1948, which was very shortly after the war ended, looking back, at the time it seemed like, oh, a lot of time has gone by since World War II ended. But then, or now it seems, like a short distance after the war ended. We went to Bastille Day celebration at Versailles, at the Palace of Versailles of Louis XIV. And it was a big, huge festivity, and there were all kinds of fireworks, and there was a large crowd of people assembled. And my brother and I have a brother 2 years younger, thought, oh, this is the coolest thing, all these fireworks, it's so exciting. And we were in the midst of a large crowd of people. And all of a sudden, somebody in that crowd started screaming. It was a very intense and loud screaming that sounded like a person in acute distress. And it wasn't clear, we couldn't see where it was coming from. It was a thick crowd. And my parents, who inquired, they knew enough French to ask people what was going on. And at that time I was 7.5 years old, and what turned out to be the case was that in the crowd, not far from us, was a French girl who was either 12 or 14 years old, and when the fireworks went off, she thought they were bombing, because she had lived through bombings in World War II. And at that moment, was the first time in my life that I realized that there were people in the world who had had a totally different life experience than I had. And at that moment, I sort of relativized my own perspective to realize, oh, I'm an American and I grew up, I was only 7. I'm an American, I grew up in America, even though I remember there was a war and so on. There was no combat near any place that I was, and here was this person who was a little older than me, but a kid like me, and had this totally different experience and was seeing the world in a totally different way. And so at that moment, I became aware of that there could be radically different experiences of the world, and at the same time, that this was another person like me, who was a kid like me, having that radically different experience. So at that moment, I had this sense of commonality across complete difference. I had the experience of radical difference, and at the same time, this was a fellow human being who was a fellow human being with me, that we were all part of the same species or group, nice. And so on. And that experience was one of the most formative experiences that I had in my life. Then the second thing that I was thinking of in relation to this question was, I remembered that when my father died, and my father died in 1980, so it's a while ago, he had been very active in organizations, and he had a very large funeral which people spoke about him, and a guy who spoke talked about my father being at a meeting in which there were all kinds of different factions and disputes among different groups of people at the meeting, and somebody at the meeting said, well, we have to get united here. We have to get unified. And my father said, I'm already unified. And because he had a perspective, and then I don't remember the rest of the story, and he didn't go into details about the meeting, but the point is that my father, and I think both my parents, were people who had the ability to take in multiple perspectives and integrate them and synthesize them and do justice to them, but arrive at some kind of integrated perspective. And just this idea of my father saying, I'm already unified, and implied there is, and I've achieved a unity that will work for other people as well. That was another experience, in terms of my personal experience, another thing having to do with unity. I could tell you many more, but I think for time purposes,
Thank you very much.
that will be enough.
What is your professional point of view of unity as scientist?
Well, that is a good question. And there's two halves to that. One is in the practical side of my professional life. And what I mean by that is being a faculty member at a university who has to be at faculty meetings with other faculty and arrive at some common policies and so on. And the other is intellectually, since my profession also involves intellectual work or intellectual thought, how do I think about unity in that context? So with the first part, the profession, how I am as a person in the professional world interacting with other people, I think I'm always trying to, in some intuitive way, and I don't know how this intuition works, because it's an intuitive process. I try to attune myself to what is the need of this whole group or whole system that I'm in, with regard to whatever the issues are. And I don't actually know how I do that. And I don't know, I can't trust my own judgment as to whether I succeed or not. But I often come up with ideas that, people value or respect, that come out of this intuition, and it's just something that I'm doing inside my head, which is trying to pay attention to what is the genuine need that somehow unites or is common to all of these different people, regardless of their different positions, and what's going on with the whole system. And I don't know how I do that. Intellectually, I come out of this intellectual tradition, influenced especially by Hegelian philosophy and Marxian theory, which pays attention to the internal contradictions of things, not only differences between things, like between different conflicting groups, but, and this was the core Hegelian idea, that things in and of themselves, all by themselves, have inner contradictions and tensions which are part of their essence, and therefore part of helping things be or become what they are is to help unfold those inner tensions and contradictions to make possible a higher unity in this way that Hegel refers to. In German it's called Aufheben. In English there's this word they use to translate it, which is a really dry, almost stupid word in English, called sublating. And it means abolishing the contradictions or tensions of things in a higher unity, so that those things are still there. They have not been annihilated or eliminated, but they take on a new place or have a new configuration in a non-conflictual way because of the way they've been incorporated into a higher unity. So I think that I tend to think about almost everything, including individual people that I know, my wife, my friends, students that I work with, fellow faculty members, in the pieces of music that I listen to, paintings that I look at. I think I tend to both perceive them and think about them in terms of those inner contradictions. And I think the things that I'm drawn to, if I think aesthetically, like musical works, the composers that I most love, Bach, Beethoven, Mahler, Mozart, painters like Cézanne, Paul Klee, Leonardo da Vinci, some of their greatness is creating unities that integrate certain tensions and contradictions that lesser artists were not able to grasp the unity of, and therefore their work doesn't have the same greatness. So I would say that idea of unity as the unity of opposites, or as things having inner contradictions, is part of the way I both think about and subjectively experience unity.
What kind of a contribution would you like to make along your